Hi all, welcome to session 3 of Navigating Children's Grief During Uncertain Times. So just to review, the approach that we're working from is J. William Warden's 4 tasks of mourning. So last week we covered the T, to accept the reality of the loss. This week we're focused in on E, experience the pain of the loss. Next week we'll focus in on A, adjust to a new life. And R, the week after, reinvest in the new reality. And then we'll finish the 6-week series with my answering questions that you have submitted. So E, experience the pain of the loss. This is where a lot of people tend to lean away from grief and tend to lean away from pain because most people do not have a pain tolerance or pain threshold. Certainly as a parent, myself being a mother, I never want to see my kids in pain. So I'll do whatever I can to keep them from pain. Sometimes I'm putting myself almost in more pain. When it comes to grief and loss, though, it's important for us as parents, as adults, as grandparents, etc., to role model to children how to experience and express the pain of grief and loss in a way that is healthy. What I have found in my experience in my time working with bereavement and working with grief and loss is a lot of people who don't find healthy coping mechanisms when it comes to pain related to loss and grief tend to numb grief and loss. They tend to numb that pain. And some of the ways that I've seen that be numbed could be through addiction, whether it's through alcohol or substances. It can be through behaviors such as cutting. It can be through overeating. It can be through undereating. It can be through gambling. It can be through being on social media all the time. But people numb in a lot of different ways to try to not feel the pain of grief and loss. So this is something we need to role model for the kids that are around us. So just as a reminder, as we get into this, all the feelings that we have when we experience a loss is grief. And it's a normal reaction to loss and change. And it's something we really need to work on to validate that it is normal. It hurts and it's not always fun to go through, but it is normal. So some different physical symptoms that you may see in yourself or in your child could be headaches, fatigue, shortness of breath, dry mouth, dizziness, just kind of that heaviness of the body, muscle weakness, and maybe stomach ache. What I've found and what people have said in a lot of the literature is that folks who don't express their symptoms of grief emotionally, it tends to come out more physically. I know for my kiddos, my younger child tends to be a little bit more anxious, and his anxiety projects as stomach aches. And then usually if we can talk through what he might be anxious about, the stomach ache can tend to subside as he talks about it. But again, remember the emotional is connected to the physical. So if your child is displaying more physical symptoms in these last couple of weeks, certainly get them checked out by a doctor. But also if you've been to the doctor or you as a parent are like, you don't seem sick, really kind of lean in and ask questions about those emotions. And I'll give you some tips for that at the end of today. Some behavioral symptoms of grief that you may see: sleeplessness. I don't know how many of your kids have had trouble sleeping since we've been on isolation. I know my 10-year-old daughter has had a lot of trouble sleeping. And for her, it's that anxiety at nighttime, wondering what's next? What does school look like? What does the next day look like? Loss of appetite, crying, some nightmares. Behaviorally, with a lot of our kiddos, we may see regression in behavior, because you've got to remember, for a lot of children, we've been home since March 17th. It's a long time. They've been out of structure. They've been out of routine. Even if they have structure and routine, it's not the structure and routine that they're used to from whatever that school structure and routine looks like. You may see more of a social withdrawal, especially if you've been really good about isolating and keeping distance, for kiddos to remember what it's like to be around other people and kind of what those social cues are. Some kids who've been home with parents and just siblings for weeks at a time may forget that they have to share adults' attention. They may forget how to sit in their seat in school. They may, I think something we're going to see a lot is the attention span is going to be a lot lower than it used to be because they haven't been expected to sit and pay attention for any length of time. So just be aware of, I think we're all going to see with kids some kind of COVID slip. Not just, we talk about the summer slip, but not just with academics, but also with those social emotional behaviors as well. And then emotional, you may say anger, guilt, sadness, helplessness, inability to concentrate, difficult in decision making. Anger tends to be a go-to emotion. It tends to be a top layer emotion of an iceberg. And underneath the anger tends to be feelings that folks can have less control of, or emotions that folks or kids have less control of. Again, using my child as an example, I know my son has anger a lot, but when I start talking to him, underneath the anger iceberg is typically fear. It's typically disappointment. It's typically sadness, or it's him not feeling great about himself. So usually, when he starts expressing anger, I have him go, and sit and think about it. And then we come back and we go through different feelings that he's feeling underneath. And a lot of times, it's disappointment. Right now, it's been really challenging to go and do different things. He's disappointed. He's disappointed he can't see friends. He's disappointed, for example, Carowinds isn't open. He's disappointed that we can't go to the movies. He's disappointed, that we can't do the things that we did 17, 18 weeks ago. So what do you do with all this? How do you help as a parent, as a grandparent, as an aunt, uncle, family member of a child as they're getting ready to go back to school, whatever that looks like? Something that I learned years ago at an end-of-life nursing education consortium is to consider the acronym CHILD. The C stands for consider. We need to consider that particular child. What has their loss history looked like up to this point? Have they had any significant losses? Has a loved one in the family died? Has a parent's work schedule changed? Has a grandparent taken custody? Was there a divorce? Have they moved? Is COVID really their first time with loss? Do they have any loss and grief language? Or is this the very first time that they've experienced loss? The H is be honest and express that honestly. Like as a parent, it's saying, and for example, me saying to my child, I'm really frustrated that I can't go into work. I'm really frustrated that I can't see my students in the classroom. How are you feeling about the idea of school? Being honest about what we're feeling, and then inviting the I involving children in the conversation. Again, as adults, we don't want to put children into a position to take care of us. When we are being honest with children, we want to do it when we're okay. Showing tears to a child is okay with grief and loss, but crying in hysterics in front of a child where they're worried what's going to happen to you isn't okay. But showing that tears and crying is a part of grief and loss is okay to do. Again, talking about how you're doing, how you're feeling, then involve or invite them into the conversation. If you are trying to create a schedule at home for your child, involve them. Give them a couple choices. So, I was thinking from 8 to 9 that we would have math or reading time. Which do you want to do first, math or reading? That way you're giving some control back. Something we always need to remember is when there is a loss, typically we feel out of control. So where can you involve the child and give them some control? L is listen. Simply listen to what's on their mind, and don't listen to answer, but listen to understand. I know myself as a parent over the last, several weeks, I'm less patient than I typically am. I'm less patient because, I'm trying to work from home. I'm trying to meet their needs. I'm trying to do 5,000 things. I explained it most recently as I feel like a computer that has 50 tabs open at any given time. So not always listening to my children. I hear the words that they're saying, but I'm not listening to understand what they're thinking and feeling. So really be present. And the D stands for just do it over and over again. This isn't one and done. Loss is never a one and done thing. We need to remember when we need to consider the age and developmental stage of the child, because that's going to factor into the D, do it over and over again. As a child grows up and a child goes from different developmental stages, they're able to handle more cognitively and emotionally. So they're going to understand and almost experience the loss over again as they age. So they're going to have different questions, which can, as an adult, it can really keep us on our toes. So just something to be aware of. Here are some resources. The Dougie Center is a great resource. It's just, this is a simple handout on grief during the COVID-19 pandemic. And then I don't know how many of you have followed along. CNN, this was several weeks ago back in April, did a town hall where CNN partnered with Sesame Street, and Sesame Street characters talked to different health professionals about COVID-19 and about the pandemic, and answered their questions. Sometimes I think we want to try to shelter our children away from information because we want to protect them. But by protecting them, we need to think about, we need to give them age and developmental appropriate information so they can understand what's going on to the best of their capability. That's part of that involving. Otherwise, if we're not the ones giving them information, they're going to get information from friends, they're going to get information from TV, they're going to get information from YouTube. And we want to filter what information they're getting so they're not, hearing their information themselves and then being worried. As I was putting my son to bed a couple of weeks ago, we were laying down and he was talking. He was like, "Mama, is the pandemic going to be like the zombie apocalypse? Like, are we all going to have to go on an airplane and get sent away and away from each other?" I said, "Buddy, where did you hear that?" He's like, "Well, it's something I watched on YouTube." I'm like, wow, that's a lot to unpack. Even when we think kids aren't listening and aren't paying attention, if we have the news on in the background, if we're talking to other adults, they're paying attention and they're listening. So we do want to talk to them about it, but when we are talking to them about it, consider their age and their developmental stage as well. And just here's the references that were used for today. But I thank you for tuning in again. Next week, we'll be on week 4, and we will be covering the A, the adjusting to the new environment. As always, I hope that you found this helpful. And if there's any questions that I can answer, please do not hesitate to send them in. Have a good week. Thanks.